Welcome to Bluff Creek Podcast Radio.
I'm Lily.
And I'm Anna.
Today's special guest is
Lisa Slazak-Moser.
Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
So, let's start off with some questions. Where'd you live overseas?
I grew up overseas. I left the U.S. when I was 3 and came back when I was a senior in high school. While I was overseas, I lived in Bermuda for 2 years, in France for 5 years, Belgium for 3 years, Stockholm, Sweden for 1 year, and then in London for 2 years.
Wow.
And then I went back overseas again as a grown-up, and I lived in Singapore for 6.5 years and Switzerland for almost 2 years.
I have never traveled that much.
Well,
Me neither.
I was overseas as a kid because of my father's job. He was a diplomat with the State Department.
So, what was your family like?
Well, there were 4 kids, and then my mom and dad. I have an older sister, and she did not go to London. She went and did part of her schooling in Copenhagen, Denmark. And then I had a younger sister and a younger brother. And they came back when my younger sister was a 10th grader and my younger brother was an 8th grader.
So, sounds like we have an interesting traveling.
So what was it like traveling back and forth from places?
When I was a kid, it was kind of interesting because at that time, commercial air travel wasn't as common as it is now. And in fact, it was very, very expensive. So the government used to bring us back to the U.S. every 2 or 3 years by ship instead of by plane. So every time we would come back to the U.S., we got to come back on a cruise, which was very cool when you're a kid because every 2 or 3 years I got to go on a cruise from somewhere in Europe to New York, and then we'd stay for the summer and visit my grandparents, and then we'd go back on another cruise to go back over to Europe.
That's a lot of cruises.
There was a lot of cruises. It was great fun.
So, I've only went on one cruise.
I haven't been on one since then, so.
So how many languages do you speak?
Well, I'm not fluent in all of them anymore. When I came back to the U.S. as a kid, I spoke French, German, Spanish, a fair amount of Russian, and English. Now I still speak French relatively well. I can get along in German when I have to. I can get along in Spanish when I have to. I only know a few phrases of Russian. And I still speak English. Haven't forgotten that.
Yeah. Didn't seem like it.
So what are some of your hobbies?
I'm a storyteller. That's one of the things that I do. I tell stories to kids and to a variety of audiences. I like to ski. I like to do yoga. I read a lot. And I like to travel. That's one of my big hobbies is traveling. I try to travel as much as I can.
Seems so.
Yep. I went to Israel earlier this year, and then when my daughter graduated, we went to Ireland and spent 10 days in Ireland. And my next trip, I'm hoping, is going to be to Peru, to Machu Picchu.
Wow.
But traveling is a great thing to do. And knowing languages in the places you are is a great thing to know. One of the reasons that I spoke as many languages as I spoke is because I firmly believe that you should try to speak the language of the places that you're visiting or the places that you live. Whatever country you're in is The people there are much more receptive if you try to speak to them in their own language, because after all, you are in their country, so you should, out of respect, make that effort. So that was one of the reasons that I knew the languages that I did, because we traveled a lot overseas, and it was important to be able to communicate with the people that we were with. And it comes in handy. When I was a kid, we traveled once on a summer vacation. We went from Sweden all the way down to Greece and then back up again. Went through numerous Eastern European countries, and at that time they were part of the Soviet Union, so this was quite a while ago. And when we were in Poland, I remember we always traveled camping, and we stopped at a campground in Poland outside of Warsaw, and slept there that night. The next morning we got up, packed everything up, put it all in the car, and drove off. And at lunchtime we stopped at a roadside picnic area and had our picnic lunch, got back in the car, and kept on going. And about an hour and a half after we had been driving, I wanted to take my contact lenses out and realized that I had left my purse at the roadside stand. So we turned around and went back because we had to. My passport was in my purse, and I had to have my passport. So we went back to the picnic area, and when we got there, unfortunately, my purse wasn't there. Well, my father and I were pretty worried about this, and we started driving around, and we found a police station in a town about a half an hour away from where we had been, and we went in, and nobody there spoke English. Well, fortunately, I spoke fluent German and fluent French at that time, and I started speaking in French, and they didn't understand what I said, and I started speaking in German, and they realized which language I was speaking, and they went and they found a woman in the town who spoke German, and she was able to come. And before we had started the whole process of me being able to speak German so they could understand it, while I was trying to explain to them how I'd lost my purse, I had my glasses in my purse, I had my passport in my purse. My father sort of did mime to show them what had happened, and he took his passport out of his pocket, he took his glasses out of his pocket, he put them in one of the satchels that belonged to the policeman, and then the woman came, and I explained to her in German what had happened, and they called around, and they found that there was a policeman in a police station about 30 kilometers away who had found my purse. So they gave us directions how to get there, and we left the police station, and lo and behold, a policeman came running out after us very quickly. He had my father's passport and my father's glasses, and he had left them in the policeman's bag, and we would have started all over again. But we did manage to get to the police station and recover my passport and my glasses. Had I not spoken German, it might have been a lot more difficult for us to make that happen. So it's always a good thing to be able to speak some of the language of the country you're visiting.
True.
Thank you for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Today's radio podcast is brought to you by Bluff Creek Elementary and Eastern Carver County Schools.